Hey everybody, I'm recording this video for students of mine in MIS3502, and this lecture here is all about accessibility. And before I go on any further, I want to give credit where credit's due. The material here is largely created originally by a former student of mine, Ni Wen. She graduated in the class of 2020. That's right in the middle of the pandemic. She graduated, and she has since gone on to have a very an excellent career. Can I just say that? And her area of expertise is accessibility, and you can see the links to her community site and her LinkedIn page there. And I just want to express my thanks to her for putting together what was the first version of this, and I have since added to the material and changed it a little bit. So thank you, Ni. And her career so far is a great example as to why learning something about accessibility at this stage of your development is a useful thing. So let's get going. Now, we are pretty early on in the semester here, and some of you might be wondering why should we be even thinking about accessibility now? It's kind of an odd place to start. The name of the course is Web Service Programming, and accessibility is largely a kind of a client-side user experience, user interface sort of thing. And what does that have to do with all this sort of back-end server stuff? Well, I'll give you my thinking as to why I'm putting this as putting this so early in the semester, and that's because accessibility. First off, it's the right thing to do. It, being considerate of others, those who need special consideration, is just a good ethical thing. This is also a great place for us to reacquaint ourselves with some HTML, right? It might have been a semester or two since you've had to write any HTML of substance. It gives me an on-ramp to the AWS S3 storage and web pages we can store out there. So it gives me a way to do that without having to embrace all the complexities of Lambda functions. This topic, it has been a great career booster for several recent grads, including me, the student I mentioned, the alum I mentioned just a moment ago. And thinking about accessibility is a good sort of universal approach to thinking about both user experience and the user interface. So for that reason alone, this is a good place to start, because we're not just thinking about components here. We're thinking about systems. And if I want to build an accessible system, then I have to think about the accessibility needs at every layer of the system. So to just underscore that point further, I have this slide here where, again, in a prior coursework, some of you have, I think all of you have studied user experience. And by now, you should know that user experience and the user interface are different things. They are different. So when I'm talking about user experience, I'm talking about how the end user uses the solution from end to end. So how do I interact with the system? How is information organized so that it makes sense to the user? We actually do research on how people interact with the system to see if our understanding of the user behavior matches up with what we matches up with what they really do. It involves going through different scenarios, and you can understand that that's a whole process. And in doing that, we do wireframes and prototyping and trying to imagine what our solution will do. And that's different from, all that is different from user interface, which encompasses things like color and what does it look like, and what font should I use, and what layout will be attractive. And that is the realm of the graphic designer. Those are people who are interested in understanding what sorts of visual imagery communicates and evokes feeling and so on, right? So a lot of interplay between those two realms, but they are different. Just kind of like the right hemisphere of your brain is different from the left hemisphere of your brain. And the point I want to make here is that accessibility is a universal concern across all of those areas, right? So this makes it a very useful topic, because if I'm thinking about the user and what abilities or disabilities they may have, and I'm thinking about the whole system, accessibility becomes a sort of useful valve, if you will, for determining whether or not my solution is going to be good or not. A sort of regulating valve, right? So what's the agenda for today? The agenda for today is to talk about what accessibility is, talk about why it's important, and some of that might surprise you. And then we also talk about how we can make accessible solutions from the beginning. And there's a hands-on element to this video lecture. It presupposes that you've already been through the setup work that I assigned. So there's no strict requirement that you have to have the setup work done in order to watch this video, right? But if you want to follow along with it, you're going to need to have that setup work done. Okay, and I recommend that. So we have some follow-up at the end. So part one, what is accessibility? Well, let's start by kind of giving you the insider scoop, if you will. There is a sort of shorthand reference to accessibility that's popular in industry today, and that is to reference the rather lengthy word of accessibility with a shorthand notation of A11y. So that those two little blue characters there in the middle, that's a number one, that's another numeral one, so A11y, and it's a pronounced A11y, accessibility. Just kind of a, by now you know that the information technology industry just loves these silly little abbreviations and notations, and this one has caught on. Okay, so if in future slides or in future assignments or in materials I reference A11y, you will now know that I'm talking about accessibility. All right, let's talk about what it means for something, anything, to be accessible. The definition of accessible is from our good friends who, manage a dictionary of the English language, Merriam-Webster. Accessible means that the thing is easily used or accessed by people with disabilities, or it has been adapted for use by people with disabilities. All right, so that's what it means for something to be accessible. So when we talk about web accessibility, we have two different definitions here. One provided to us by an excellent resource, the Mozilla Developer Resource. If you've never heard of that, you need to at least know that that exists. It's a great repository of all manner of web-related standards. And according to the Mozilla Developer Network, accessibility is the practice of making your websites usable by as many people as possible. We traditionally think of this as being about people with disabilities, but the practice of making sites accessible also benefits other groups, such as those using mobile devices or those with slow network connections. That's from the Mozilla developer documentation. And then we have this other remark from our good friends at Wikipedia that says, web accessibility is the inclusive practice of ensuring that there are no barriers that prevent interaction with or access to websites on the World Wide Web by people with physical disabilities, situational disabilities, and socioeconomic restrictions on bandwidth and speed. So notice that in both of those definitions, the idea is inclusivity, and the idea is that we want our web sites and web applications to be usable by persons of all types. Whether they have the conventional assortment of the five senses, or common motor skills, or we're also including persons who might not be able to access the internet in a way that is so very common in the world today. And if you take a minute and just think about how attached you are personally, and I'm talking about myself as well, think about how attached you are to these little devices here, these smartphones, and how often during the day you access information and engage in communication through those devices. You'll understand how important that is. On the prior slide, we had a definition of web accessibility. Of course, there's also mobile accessibility, which, no big shock, is basically the same thing. And the point I want to make here with this is rather than just have a whole bunch more text, is to point out that if you make a web application or a website accessible through a mobile device, one of the important distinctions is that you need to make sure that it's viewable from a portrait orientation or from a landscape orientation, right? Both orientations matter, and you should be able to use the web application or the mobile application in either of those layouts, with some exceptions. I mean, if you are trying to simulate, say, a piano keyboard, that is inherently a landscape sort of layout, so we would make an exception for that. In fact, in case you don't believe me, I'm going to do a click here on the documentation. And what I want, again, I don't expect students to read or memorize this, but what I want you to see is that on that Mozilla Developer Network that I just linked to, there is a mobile accessibility checklist. This sort of documentation exists in great detail in the world today. So no developer should be able to say, oh, well, I had no idea. I had no idea how to make my mobile application accessible to persons with disabilities, or to make it accessible for mobile devices. There is a well-established checklist for this by this very reputable organization. In this case, it's the Mozilla Developer Network. There's references in here to the WCAG. That is the Web Consortium's accessibility guidelines. That's from the World Wide Web Consortium, the W3C, again, big, long-standing, well-established organization. And notice that down here that they actually mention this sort of orientation thing that I was talking about. If I find it, here it is. Content should be restricted to a single, or should not be restricted to a single orientation, such as portrait or landscape, unless essential. What do you mean by essential? Well, if you're simulating a piano, or for those of you who have used a physical bank check, you may have noticed that is a sort of a portrait layout, right? And those old-timey paper checks that folks in my generation and before used to use, right? So there you go. All right, so we have mobile accessibility, and there's a well-established guideline for that. And there's on that same site, there's guidelines for website accessibility as well. So now we have some idea of what accessibility is, and in particular, web accessibility. So why is this important? Well, disability, let's talk about what disability is. We talked about what accessibility is. Let's talk about what disability is. Disability is a physical, mental, cognitive, or developmental condition that interferes with a person's ability to engage in everyday tasks. Okay? Again, Merriam-Webster definition. And so why is that? Why do we care? Well, for starters, this again, I pulled this from the developer Mozilla developer documentation. I just thought it was well expressed. Here we go. I'm looking right here now. It is wrong to exclude someone from a physical building because they are in a wheelchair. Modern public buildings generally have wheelchair ramps or elevators. It's also not right to exclude someone from a website because they have a visual impairment. We are all different, but we are all human and therefore have the same human rights. And again, I would invite you to consider just how attached you are to your online experience and how closely integrated that is with your everyday activities, and how wrong it would be to exclude someone from that knowingly, right? So number one, accessibility is the right thing to do. Number two, this was awfully important, and I said some things might surprise you in here. This might come as a surprise to some folks. Providing accessible sites is part of the law in some countries. That's important, right? So if I create an application or a website or a mobile application, and I do so without considering accessibility, that application may not be may be restricted for an entire country, right? So that's a big market. That could be a big market for an application. So this is of considerable concern from strictly let's setting morality aside for a moment. From a strictly monetary point of view, it's a concern. So building accessible websites benefits everyone. I think that's my main point in all of this. And again, it goes back to that universal concern. The idea is if I do a good job of making a web solution accessible, then chances are good I've made it better for everybody. So we have some examples of that down here. Using good HTML improves the search engine optimization of your site, making it easier to find through Google search. Caring about accessibility demonstrates good ethics and morals and improves your public image, right? There have been some very visible court battles, against institutions, businesses, where persons with disabilities, often it's the Association for the Blind, have come forward and said, "You're excluding us. You're discriminating against us." And forget about the financial outcome of that. Just the reputation hit that an organization takes is notable. So again, maybe that's a surprise to you. And thinking about accessibility often has these sort of unexpected byproduct of making the site more usable by everybody. And here in this quote here, it's talking about mobile phone users or those with low network speed. It also could apply to, say, low light situations. I mean, how many of you have ever been in a situation where you've been outside when you're trying to look at something on your smartphone, and the glare of the sun is so bright and the contrast is so poor on the screen that you say, I can't read this. Okay, so again, if the developers are thoughtful about contrast and visibility issues, then a lot of those issues get addressed. So let's talk about kinds of disabilities. I kind of mentioned a couple of those just in passing in just the last couple minutes here. There are kinds of disabilities that are commonly addressed are color blindness, meaning I may be red-green colorblind. That affects a lot of people in the world. Persons with low vision. So again, I may need corrective lenses, right, of some sort. And of course, there's a whole spectrum there. And I can remember a gentleman I used to work with who was legally blind. Right, his vision was so poor he would fall into this low vision category. Right, he could see some things with very 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 thick glasses, and he would often have to get down close to a keyboard or to a piece of equipment to look at it. He was legally blind, but he did have some sight. So low vision, blindness, of course, you can't see at all. Mobility disabilities, that would be individuals who maybe because they're paralyzed or they just lack fine motor skills, they have to they're limited in what they can do with a mouse or with a keyboard. So those of you who are Windows users know that if I want to reboot a machine, I can Control Alt Delete. Well, that action of using two fingers on the left and another finger on the right to hold down two buttons and another button up here, that's difficult for some people, right? Maybe they don't have the ability to press all three of those keys at the same time. Auditory refers to the ability to hear. So if you have chimes or bells or audio cues in your application, you want to make sure that that's not the only cue. You want to have some sort of visual cue or a haptic cue, which would be the a smartphone that vibrates or something some way. So something you could feel. And then, of course, there's cognitive disabilities, and that's, of course, the hardest one to address because you need a certain amount of language ability to use a computer, and there is an upper limit there, but we want to do our best, right, to convey things with words and pictures and give the user more than one way of doing the same thing, give them a path to getting the desirable result. And I would add to this list, because it's mentioned frequently, socioeconomic limitations. And again, I understand there's an upper limit to what you can do there, but certainly you don't want to create an application that can only be used by users with a high bandwidth network connection, super fast, super accessible. You may be dealing in, you have to, and this of course is going to vary somewhat from project to project, but generally speaking, you want to assume the minimum sort of connectivity and work from there. So in all of this, just think about how the World Wide Web is used for commerce, news and information, entertainment. And the bottom line here is it would be wrong to exclude persons from those resources based solely on their disability. So where it's within our power to make something accessible, we should, right? And we do that because it's the right thing. We do that because it's monetarily it's the right thing to do. And it avoids some unpleasant legal contention in the future, right? The point here is that this is the sort of thing that distinguishes you. Thinking this way is the sort of thing that distinguishes you from the rookie hack novice IT person, right? An IT professional understands that not only do I have an obligation to deliver on some technology tasks, but to think about the whole system and to think about the users and to consider, the financial implications, the legal implications of what I do. It's that sort of mindset that makes a person an IT professional, and that's what you're all studying to be, right? So then you're studying an MIS degree. So we can't afford to just ignore this whole area of interest. Just making the point one more time: accessibility benefits everyone. If we include and design for these edge cases, extreme cases, then we can have a universal design for everyone. We can improve usability for all users, even those with, the traditional five senses and satisfactory, mobility and cognitive skills. We can improve it for everybody. We can broaden our market penetration. We can improve search engine optimization, and we can also avoid some unpleasantness, legal battles, and negative public relations. We can avoid all those things, and that's important. So, what can we do? What can we do to make our accessibility solution? What can we do to make solutions that are accessible? Well, first off, you have to understand your role, and then we have to use some good resources. And I would also argue that you should use some good templates, and you have to remember to test. Those would be my, that would be my prescription to you. How do I do this? Well, know what your role is. Use good resources. Use good templates, and don't forget to test. So your role in all of this is to create content and code that is accessible as you go. So we have various assistive technologies that can help a person with disabilities work with technology. So that would be some things like screen readers for those who have vision impairment. We have the platforms, right? We try to make those, that would be like your web hosting environment and your browsers and all those pieces. And then there's the human. That's you, right? The human is the one creating content. So we can have, for example, if I have a picture on a web page, a screen reader will attempt to identify what that picture is. For the person who cannot see this picture, the screen reader will attempt to translate that into text, and that can be read aloud, spoken with an audible voice, right? That is delivered to the user's browser from a web server and so on. So that's the platform. And then, but at some point, a human being has to say, well, what is this? So this image needs alt text, alternative text for a screen reader. And so you could give it alt text of cat or lizard, and that would be wrong. Right? You could give it alternate text of pet or dog or cute puppy. So if you could not see, which of those descriptions would benefit you the most, assuming that this is somehow important to the web page? Well, cute puppy is best, right? It's not like it's a long description, but it's way better than just pet. It's a little bit more specific than dog, and of course, cat is just flat out wrong, right? And again, if I put something in here that's wrong, there's nothing that the screen reader can do to there's no at this point, there's no artificial intelligence that says, oh, that's a dog, and I need to say the word dog to the user with disabilities. That's probably not too far down the road, but it's not here yet. Okay, so bear that in mind. All right, so what are my resources? This sounds complicated, Schaefer. How do I make all these things? Well, I'm going to share with you some resources that I want you to use. I want you to use the Firefox View page source feature, which I'll be honest is not really for accessibility. But it's a way of ensuring that you have valid HTML. So I'll show you how to use that. Then the big one here is the Wave extension. The Wave is a web accessibility evaluation tool. That's from an organization called WebAIM. That's Web Accessibility in Mind. Fun fact: you can, the Wave extension is maintained by, I think it's Utah State, but it was originally created right here at Temple University. You can go look that up for yourself. And then you should be aware that these documents exist. So really, for the purposes of this course, I want you to zero in on those first two things. And then for the purpose of like your awareness in your future careers, you say, well, we don't know. Well, we have to make this website accessible. We have to make this web application accessible. We have to make this mobile application accessible. Where do we go? How do we know that? Well, you should know that there's these two organizations out there. And even if you outsource the whole thing to some sort of accessibility consultant, it's good for you to know these things, so you can know if you're working with someone who's telling you accurate information or not. Also, let me just point out that the fact that such extensive documentation and guidelines exist gives the business and organization no excuse legally for not, for creating, processes, solutions, applications, websites that are inaccessible. That excuse of, oh, we just didn't know how to do it is gone. It's not there, right? Because references like this are so prevalent. From, again, these are two very reputable sources. If you're really serious about this, and you say maybe you looked up Nee's LinkedIn page here on the opening page, you say, boy, I think I could make a career out of this. I would encourage you to check out some screen reader software. I don't expect you to do that. I don't expect the typical MIS3502 students to do that. I had a couple students do that last semester. They made a great project. And they really made that the focal point of their project. I do not expect many students to do this, but if you're interested in this as a possible career path, then you should get familiar with either JAWS or NVDA. You can see from this chart that these two screen reader packages are the most popular. I do find it kind of intriguing that the screen reader software packages that have the greatest market share are those that run on Microsoft platforms. Apple likes to position itself as the most socially conscious, IT organization, and the fact that, folks with disabilities don't choose the voiceover product overwhelmingly. It's just, I don't know. I'm just going to leave that observation where it is and let you draw your own conclusion. For all of you Mac users out there who have this affinity. All right. So I don't expect anyone to download those. And if, again, didn't make this up, I got this from the WebAIM organization. All right. So now we're getting down into some very specific things here. And I'm going to be honest, sometimes accessibility problems can be tricky, but I have identified here a list of things that I would want students to be able to do, right? And I feel like my conviction as an instructor is if you can do these things well, chances are good you're going to keep yourself out of accessibility hot water, and you'll have a good foundation for, in making improvements in the future. So I want every student to be able to do these 6 things in the context of accessibility. Number 1, you should be able to spot and fix a missing title tag in an HTML page. Number 2, you should be able to spot and fix a missing or incorrect alt text in an image tag. Number 3, you should use label tags whenever you have an HTML form. Number 4, you should you might not be the most artistic person in the world, otherwise you might have chosen a different major. However, you should be able to spot poor contrast and call that out and fix it. Right? No, poor color contrast. And number 5, any critical errors identified by the wave extension, you should be able to fix, even if it involves reading a little bit and seeing what the problem is and making the fix. Again, the wave extension will report all sorts of warnings and suggestions to you. I want you to focus in on the, see right here, critical errors. And then number 6, Firefox view page source. That will show you problems with your HTML, and you should be able to fix those. That's what I expect students to be able to do. So I have some examples here, and I'm actually going to get my hands dirty, so to speak, here in just a minute, and show you some of this live and in action. But you said, well, what do you mean the HTML title tag? Well, I mean this thing right here. This title tag has content in it. And the title tag, of course, is nested inside of the head tag, which is nested inside of the HTML document. And if this was on a complicated website, you would want it to go from specific to general, right? So, and the reason for that is that a visually impaired person the screen reader would automatically start. This will be the first thing the screen reader reads aloud to the visually impaired person, and it's going to read from left to right. It will read the most specific thing first, and then move on to the next thing, and then on to the next thing, and so on. And the person with the visual impairment probably has a clicker or a tab button, and they will say, all right, go on to the next thing. Go on to once they know what the page is about. Right? So that way you don't make them endure reading degree requirements, MIS department, Fox School of Business, every time that page loads, right? The screen reader will say degree requirements, and then the visually impaired person will say click, move on to the next tag. Image tags do not have meaningful text. This is a big one. This is the big no-no. I would just be mortified if any student left my class and they were unable to pick up on this as a problem, right? So my image tag here is this is my HTML image tag. It has a source, and I have here puppy.png, and my alt text is cute puppy. This is the exact same image I had on the earlier slide. So this is good. This tells me what this is. Now, if I have a different image and the image is purely decorative, it doesn't convey any meaning. It's just something nice to look at on the page. So I use a heart in that example. You can use an alt equals and then an empty string right here. That's acceptable if the image is decorative. And then, of course, the third option here is the bad one. We do not want to see this, right? So we would not want to see, this with no alt attribute at all. This is valid HTML, but it's not accessible, right? There's a difference between in terms of the HTML specification, this is okay, but in terms of accessibility, it's not. Label tags should be used in HTML forms. So in my browser, I could have a form with a bit of text This is your primary email address, and then a place for the person to type that in. The browser has no concept of the idea of next to, right? So the fact that your primary email address is next to this input tag doesn't really help the person who's not sighted. You want to have a label here so that this text, notice that the label is around your primary email address. This text is the label for this input tag. And the linkage between the two, the text and the input tag, is the value here of primary email, which I get to make up. I get to make up the ID, and then in the label it tells me what this is for. Right? So these two, for this text to be linked with this input field, this for attribute has to reference the ID of the second box, of the following box, I should say. So what's this text for? It's for this. Right? The ID is how I uniquely identify a tag, right? So this makes total sense. This label is for some tag. What tag? This tag. All right, and finally we have contrast. Contrast being insufficient is a problem, especially in low light situations. I don't need you to obsess too much about the color contrast ratio. What it is, just know that there's a measure called the color contrast ratio. For those of you who want to geek out over this, the ratio is a ratio of something called a lumen, right? Lumens are measures of light, how bright something is. So the first number is the brightest color, and the second number is the darkest. And they're always the color contrast ratios are always expressed in something to one, where the one is the darkest color and the first value is the brightest color. So text with bad contrast has a contrast ratio less than 4.5 over 1, 4.5 to 1. That is the most universal thing I can say about that. There's an exception for very large text. If your text is really big, the threshold gets a little bit more generous. But this is, I'm trying to get it down to things I want students to know. 4.5 to 1 is generally considered good. 4.5 or 1 or better, I should say. So this is bad because the color contrast ratio here is 2 to 1. And you can see that's gray text on a gray background. Hard to read. Here I have red text on a pink background, and the contrast there is 6 to 1, and this is considered accessible. 6 is greater than 4.5, right? So good. This is great contrast. You can't get any stronger than this. This is 21 to 1. That is to say that I've put the background color at its darkest possible setting and the foreground color at its brightest possible setting, or the other way around, right? If I had black text on a white background, I would have the same 21 to 1 ratio. This is as good as it gets. And the reason I think this is good general knowledge. But the reason and again, I mentioned there's an exception to this rule, that is if you use the wave extension will call out and identify contrast errors and tell you why it's bad contrast. So I don't think it's profitable to memorize all the WCAG rules, but you should be generally aware that this is a problem, and that 4.5 number is something you should know. So here's a summary. I've talked about a lot of things, and some of you might be saying, well, I don't know what Schaefer is going to ask on the quiz about this. Look here, I've got a summary page. Everybody see this? This is summary. I would want students to know what accessibility is. A11y. What is it? And why is it important? and how it relates to user experience and user interface. That was like the first 2-3 slides. I would want students to install Firefox and understand the purpose of view page source. Firefox is a free download, works on Mac, works on Windows. One of the most disappointing things a student said to me in recent memory was when I told the student, hey, you lost some points on your assignment or project or whatever it was because you had invalid HTML. You could have checked it with Firefox view page source. Student says, I don't have that on my computer. That's really disappointing because it's free and because it's a download and because you as an MIS student should go out and get the resources and tools that you need in order to do quality work. Okay. You should install the Wave extension and you should know what that's for, and I'll demonstrate that in a minute. But generally, the Wave extension is what alerts us to accessibility problems. You should understand that your role as the human content creator is essential, right? Because even automatically generated descriptions of images may be lacking or maybe too long or maybe maybe inadequate. So you play the pivotal role here, and you should be able to identify and resolve these problems. Title tag is missing or not meaningful, missing or incorrect alt text on images, missing or incorrect label tags on forms, and insufficient contrast. So in terms of like specific things I would ask you to do on a quiz, right, we're looking down here, right? These would be probably multiple choice questions. And then as far as like syntax, I would want you to know, it might be down in here. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. So let me just give you this final remark. Final thought. As we move forward in the semester, I will give you some templates to use. And the templates are created to be accessible up front. So again, in terms of suggestions for your future work life, start with a good template, one that has addressed as many of the accessibility issues as a template can. And then as you develop, keep accessibility in mind. That is to say, don't undo things that the template has done for you. Don't ignore labels. Don't ignore the title tag. Don't ignore alt text. Put them in as you go, because that's the smart play. And then test and correct before launch, right? So if you follow those three things, then your odds of creating an accessible solution go way up. Incidentally, this is very, very, very similar to what folks in IT security, which is a whole other area of concern, would want you to do, right? Well, how do I make secure applications, secure processes, secure systems? Well, I start with a foundation that's already been refined a little bit. I do my work, always keeping accessibility in the back of my mind, and before I launch and make it available to the public, I test it, right? Same sort of process. All right, I'm going to pause the recorder here, see how I'm doing on time, and then I'm going to give you a little demonstration of me using the Firefox view source and the Wave extension to fix up a web page. Okay, I'm going to try to do this in about 10 minutes to keep this whole thing under an hour or about an hour. Here I have Firefox installed in front of me. And here I have my Hello Schaefer webpage that I created when I did the setup video. If you don't have a page like this that's out on the S3 buckets of Amazon AWS, then you have to go back to the setup video. And that's all I'm going to say about that. All right, so here's my webpage, and I'm using Firefox. How do I tell if this webpage has valid HTML or not? Well, I take my hand here and I right mouse click here on the web page and I choose View Page Source. All right. All right, so this tells me the HTML that's behind this page. And notice that, I'm zooming in now. Notice that there's a red underline here saying, you know what? It looks, oh, and if I hover over it, it tells me what's wrong. Start tag is seen without seeing a doc type first, right? So it tells me that this is not valid, right? So I would then go back to Visual Studio Code, and if I was, if I was completely clueless, I would add in the doc type declaration, because that was the first thing. That the Firefox told me to do. So I add that in, and then I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to refresh, and I'm going to hit a view page source, and it tells me that that's okay. It would be nice if it gave me a little bit more instruction here, but again, notice that it picked up on how bad that was. So I'm going to stop here. I'm going to see what else I can find out. Now I'm going to move over to the Wave extension in Chrome. I could also install the Wave extension here in Firefox. If you just want to use Firefox for all of your accessibility testing, that would make sense to me. Okay? But just to prove that I have both, here we go. So I have my web page here, and because I installed the extension, and mind you, I am, just so you know, the Firefox and the Wave extension, they're here on the class site under the resources tab, and I'm not showing you how to install them. I think you're all capable of doing that, okay? So here we go. I hit the Wave extension, and it tells me, oh my goodness, there's errors. Now, I don't expect you to fix the alerts, but these are when I talk about critical errors, I'm talking about these items here that are in red, the critical errors here and the contrast errors. I have 0 contrast errors. Why? Because I have, looks like I have, actually, let me do this in Chrome. Go back here. Just kind of keep this on a separate tab. Hit my accessibility checker. Why? Because I have black text and a white background. So my contrast is fine. I wonder what these errors are. Whatever could they be? Well, there's a details button down here, right? So I'm going to click on that, and it says I have a missing or uninformative page title, and the language is missing or invalid. And if I don't know what to mean by what that means, is I click on the information, and it says what it means, why it matters, how to fix it, and it tells me where the guidelines are. Go back. Let's do this again. Here's my details. So that was my page title and my language. Again, I can see. So it gives me here, in this case, it gives me the exact HTML that I'm supposed to add. All right. So I could go back and forth between this and Firefox to see what this is, but I know what a valid HTML document looks like, and you should too. So let me go to index.html, and I know that a valid HTML document will start with HTML and end with HTML, right? And it will have a head, and it will have a body. And this is, in my opinion, I'm giving you insight into how your instructor thinks here. This should be common knowledge, what I just doing right now. Right? This is not tricky at all. No, so I'm going to add in the 2 things that I need here. I'm going to add in the language specification. And remember, it told me how to do that. It gave me an example. Oh, it looks like I need to say lang equals en. In other words, to say that the content of this page is written in English, right? Not some other language. Now the browser knows that this is English, right? And the title goes here. And when I save that, look at this is where my title will appear, right? So this is just the browser didn't know what to do, so it just gave me this long URL here. But when I refresh this, my title is now Hello World. Let's take a look at this I'm going to refresh over here and hit that wave extension again. Now I have 0 errors and 0 contrast errors. All right, so I did that in about 5 minutes. I'm going to just hit pause for a second. I'm going to pull in a page with some junk in it because it's reminiscent of the examples I had in the slide deck. I'll show you those and see what that looks like in Wave. But what I wanted to highlight to you here is that I can, with Firefox, I can quickly check to see, open this up again. I can quickly do a view page source, and you can see I have no red squiggles here. If I did, I could hover my mouse over them and get a hint as to what the problem was. So there's no excuse for having bad HTML. And I can also go through the Wave accessibility checker. So there's no excuse for critical errors or critical contrast errors. Okay, so let me hit pause and I'll show you a couple more examples. All right, so I pulled into Visual Studio Code. I created a folder called Hello World 2, and in Hello World 2, I have an index.html page, and that's what I'm looking at here. And it has in it some snippets of HTML, which are very, 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 very similar, if not identical, to what you saw in the PowerPoint presentation. So I'm going to evaluate this. I'm going to evaluate this with first with Firefox. So let me do that. So this was in Hello World 2. Put that in Hello World 2. There we go. And I have a page here. It has a title, accessibility problems. I have some items in here. And if I were to view the page source here, I see up here at the top, there's a red squiggly line here underneath head. And if I were to hover my pointer over that, it says start tag head seen, but an element of the same type was already open. That's me taking a sip of tea from my Peppa Pig mug. We have head here is a tag, and title, because title should go into the head tag. Firefox just created in the background another head tag, and it's just basically saying I don't know what's going on here. And you can see the HTML error I have here is that the title should properly belong inside of the head tag. So I'm going to fix that. Let's do that right now by coming over to my HTML file. I look in the head tag there and I say, oh, yes, silly me. I should have put this. I'm going to cut this and put it inside of the head tag. There we go. And take out the extra line breaks just to make it look nice. And hit save. And now I'm going to come back over here and refresh. And you can see that title is inside the head tag. And I scroll on down through and I don't see any more red checks. So, oh wait, I do see one. I see one right here. Look at this. Hover over this end tag H1 was seen, but there were open elements. In other words, I'm getting the H1 tag here. Notice that I said H2 and H1, H2 and H1. Oh, they don't match. So let me go fix that up. That was down here somewhere. There's my H2 tag. Here's my, oh, here it is. Fix that, H2. Save it. And I come back over here and I refresh. And scroll on down through looking for the red. And there's nothing wrong there. So I've gotten over the HTML problems. That's always a good first step. Now let's go check for some real accessibility issues. So I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to look at my page again. And so I see my title up here, accessibility problems, examples. All right. And then I see these things. Let's see. So I have some images. I have some text here, and I have a form. Let me run the checker, and it tells me that I have 2 errors and 1 contrast error. Let's start with the contrast error. Notice that there's a big red icon here under this bad text, and if I were to view the details on that and look at the information, it tells me that the contrast is insufficient. So I would want to fix that, and it tells me what part of the standards I should be looking at for this, and it tells me what the ratios are in here, and the full rule here is explained in English. Let me fix it. So I'm going to change my CSS style for the tag I have given the ID of A. I'm just going to change the font color to white. And that should be enough. White text on a dark gray or on a gray background, I should say, should be enough to make this good. Let's refresh and check. And it tells me that that's okay now. I don't have a contrast error. Let's check the other one. It says I have 2 errors here. Let's see what they are. Hit the view details. It says missing alternative text. So notice that for this image, I have the alt text of cute puppy, which this is in fact a cute puppy. For this graphic image, I have no descriptive text, or no alternative text, I should say. And that's okay if this is purely decorative. So if this is somehow essential for me understanding what this page is about, then this would be incorrect. But as far as the specification is concerned, the Wave Accessibility Evaluator doesn't pick up on meaning. It just says, well, this is marked as decorative, so that's fine. But this one has no alt text at all. Let's take a look. So I go on down here, and again, just like in the slide deck, this was good. This is probably okay, but this is outright wrong. So I would want to say alt equals, say, heart. And I'll give it an adjective just to say pretty heart. All right, and I will refresh my page here. Where was I? Here we go. I was on this page. Refresh, run the evaluator, and now that error is gone. All right, and we're down to the last error, missing form label down here. This is an awfully important one. Congrats to you if you've listened this far. You haven't flaked out on me yet. I appreciate that. But if you see down here in the bottom here, there's a little icon here, and you say, well, this input, this is the form control. This form control does not have a corresponding label. In other words, the screen reader doesn't know what this is for. This says your primary email address, but there's nothing in the screen to tell the screen reader that this box goes with this label, this piece of text. So let's take a look at that. If I go on down here, this might look a little interesting to you. You can see that I do have a label. So it wasn't the absence of the label tag. It's just that this label tag is for a tag with an ID of primary email. And you'll notice that my input tag has no ID. So I would have to give it an ID, right? And then I would have to use the ID of primary email, right? This and this have to match, right? So if I decided to call it primary underscore email, that would still have an error on my hands, right? But if I make them match and I hit save and I refresh my page and I evaluate, you'll see that I now have 0 critical errors. Let me just for fun, I'm going to go down to view details. It does point out to me under alerts that I'm missing a first level heading, and then I have 3 possible headings, and it's informing me that my heading order here is a little bit odd. Typically, I would go from H1 down to H2, and for some strange reason, just because I wanted to talk about it, I put H3 first. So that's not technically an error, but it would be good structure for me to put the H1 tag at the top because it's kind of the primary thing that this page is about. So I hit save over there. Let's refresh this and evaluate. And look, I have fewer alerts now. So the main thing to zero in on with the wave extension are the critical errors and the contrast errors. If you have something that looks weird on your web page and you're not quite sure that you like the way it's turning out, it might pay to look at the alerts or at the structural elements. It's not a bad thing, okay, to poke around in there. But in terms of things that you must fix, I would want you to identify those things. All right, you've made it to the end. Good job. Again, I didn't expect everybody to type that or to follow along, but I wanted you to see me going through the process one more time and to kind of harken back to the PowerPoint presentation with this HTML here. All right, that's where I'm going to stop. Wish everybody well, and I will see you soon in class.